Good afternoon, APUSH Nation, and welcome in, or good evening, whenever you're watching this. Today in class, we talked about how women were drastically affected by the Industrial Revolution with the Low Mill Girls and our primary source reading from Harriet Robinson. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about African Americans and how African Americans were hit hard by the Industrial Revolution. And on the surface, it wouldn't seem as if African Americans would be impacted so greatly by the technological and industrial revolutions that occurred in America in the late 1700s and early 1800s, because after all, the North was the more industrial manufacturing sector of the American economy, and most African American slaves were in the South, where planting and agriculture and the plantation style economy was dominant. But it could not be more of the opposite. The truth is that the Industrial Revolution created a brutal and vicious cycle that promulgated African Americans to fall deeper and deeper and deeper into patterns of slavery. And much like we're talking about this entire era of good feelings as the era of contradictions, slavery would only increase during the Industrial Revolution and early part of the 1800s. And like with the economy, the United States will become more sectionalized, there's that word again, more sectionalized as the 1800s roll forward. To give you a sense, though, of how this all came together, I'm going to read for you an excerpt from an abolitionist poem that was written by Abel Thomas. And here's what Abel Thomas says, and it really epitomizes the era of good feelings in the South. Its beautiful boils and bales of rich value the master controls. Of mud stills he prates, and would hotly bring the world to acknowledge that cotton is king. The idea that cotton is king and the name King Cotton is immensely important to the time period that we're talking about, because the growth of cotton as the dominant American export, and cotton was the dominant American export from 1800 to 1937. It was the number one export from the United States all over the world. The domination of cotton in the American economy, not just the Southern economy, but the American economy, prompted a rash of dramatic and brutal effects on African Americans. First and foremost is going to be an increase in the number of slaves, which is why that sometimes King Cotton, that idea of cotton being the dominant part of the American economy during the Industrial Revolution era and era of good feelings, cotton prices were soaring, and as a result, more African Americans needed to work in the fields to pick the cotton. And because you needed more African Americans to work in the fields, that meant that the number of slaves was increasing dramatically in the United States. But there's a catch to that, because in 1808, Congress actually passed a law that banned the America's involvement in the international slave trade. And so even though America had banned Congress had banned America from participating in the international slave trade, that doesn't mean that slaves couldn't still be brought in illegally. That doesn't mean that slaves, just because there were more and more of them on the American continent, weren't procreating more. So in effect, you have more slaves. Some historians call this era the Second Middle Passage, because you just have so many more African Americans that were working on southern plantations as a result of the cotton boom. And it's very similar to how when tobacco was first discovered and sugar were first discovered in the Caribbean and in the southern states during the colonial era, millions and millions of African Americans are come pouring into the United States and other regions of the Americas as a way to ensure that the Europeans and now the United States is making a profit. It's remarkable, really, the figures and the numbers of African Americans that are pouring into the United States during this time period. And the idea was that as slaves were increasing, so too was their value, because the more slaves a master owned, the more cotton that could be reduced. And so the inherent value of slaves rose to somewhere near $140,000 in today's money. That includes all the work potential and everything. And the price of slaves increased to almost $1,000 back then, which is an astonishingly high amount of money. And slaves just were coming into the United States and were growing in larger numbers than ever before. And a lot of that has to do, though, with the Industrial Revolution, because one of the most important inventions that ever created in terms of the production of cotton was Eli Whitney's cotton engine, or as it's called for short, the cotton gin. Eli Whitney was a master engineer, a master inventor, and his greatest contribution in world history was he devised a patent for what was known as the technology of interchangeable parts. The idea of interchangeable parts, think of like a car. When your engine breaks, your car isn't totally kaput. You can still function with the car, right? You just got to get a new engine. Well, that concept of interchangeable parts was revolutionary, and it's one of Whitney's greatest inventions and gifts to the Industrial Revolution. Now, inadvertently, Eli Whitney was a Northerner. He wasn't a Southerner. He didn't believe in slavery, but he invented the idea of and devised the idea of interchangeable parts. And along the way, one of the inventions that Eli Whitney put forth was the cotton engine. And the cotton gin, as it was called for short, was essentially an elaborate system. And if you Google the pictures, you can find these pictures of old cotton gins, replicas, where cotton would sort of be manicured and processed by churning the crank of a wheel, like a gear. And the refining features of the cotton would be extrapolated from the plant. It didn't take many people to run the cotton engine. So the cotton engine itself didn't actually create a higher demand for labor. What the cotton engine did create was a faster way to more efficiently refine cotton and extrapolate the cotton. And that meant that more slaves were needed in the fields to pick more cotton. So because more cotton through the cotton engine can be processed faster, more slaves are required to pick that cotton. And Eli Whitney's invention would absolutely forever change and alter slavery in the United States. Because again, the boom in cotton and the surge of King Cotton as the economic backbone of not just the South, but the United States, that prompted more planters and more slave owners to increase the demand for African slaves. The numbers are just absolutely astonishing in terms of America's cotton production. In fact, one of our great recipients of our cotton were not only the states themselves, but also Europe, and particularly Great Britain. Here's the statistic that should stand out to you. Britain relied so heavily on American-made cotton that over 80% of Britain's raw cotton they received from American factories. 80%. And this is in the early 1800s. American factories were churning out cotton so fast, and to the point where nearly 1/5 of Britain's population had some connection, direct connection to an article of clothing or something in their house to American cotton textile factories. It's astonishing. And these are estimations, but these numbers are pretty well believed in by historians. 80% of Britain's raw industrial cotton was produced by American slaves. Remarkable. And not only was Britain benefiting from the boom in cotton, King Cotton, but so too were the other United States, especially New England. And we made the connection today, like the Low Girls, they're the ones that are making the cotton into products in textile factories. Well, New Englanders were just as dependent on cotton as other parts of the world. In fact, moving ahead to 1860, I have a figure for you. New England had about 52% of its manufacturing establishments, factories, and 75% of the 5 million spindles, cotton spindles in the entire United States. So 52% of New England factories were cotton factories, textile factories, I should say, textiles. And 75% of the United States' entire cotton spindle machines were in New England. It's absolutely just remarkable. Massachusetts had 30% of the United States' spindles alone, one little tiny state. New England factories in 1860, here's some more statistics. 283 million pounds of cotton were produced in 1 year. 1 year. And that 83 pounds of cotton accounted for 67% of the world's cotton production. Think about that. 67% of the world's cotton production came from New England factories. And where that product ultimately starts from, the raw material, down in the South. There's no doubt that cotton and its impact on the South changed forever the landscape of politics too, because think about when we get to the Civil War and we talk about the issues that led to the fracturing of the states. King Cotton had a very polarizing or sectionalizing impact in the way that New England was so dependent on those raw materials. And the irony is, the New England states are all, most of them are abolitionists. They don't believe in slavery, and their laws and the state governments ban slavery. But yet they're so dependent on the cotton from the southern states that all the New England states are ultimately doing is perpetuating the vicious cycle of slavery in America, which made the issue that much more polarizing and sectionalizing. It's hard to appreciate how, we're 100 years now almost from the revolution. Slavery is increasing. The country's becoming more sectionalized, more tenuous politically than ever before. And a lot of that's going to do with some of the boundary issues we talk about later this week with the Missouri Compromise. But a bottom line here is that I want you guys... Oh, what's up, Mr. Hatch?
Sorry.
No, I'm recording my fireside chat. No, you're all right. The fans want to know what Mr. Hatch thinks about King Cotton.
About King Cotton?
Yeah.
Thought I wouldn't have bow ties.
There you go. No bow ties for Mr. Hatch. You heard that.
But the cotton economy in the South, without it, no industrial revolution. But also, slavery is probably the worst thing this country's ever done.
That's what I was just about talking to him. So I'll come by your room. I'm going to be wrapping up in a minute.
Cool.
All right. So anyways, you heard that from one of our esteemed colleagues. I don't know if you guys could pick up on that, but Mr. Hatch basically said the same thing that I was harping on, which is the increase in slavery and the promulgation of cotton. The cotton industry made America rich, but it did drive America further apart socially and ideologically. What we're going to spend time in class on after the reading quiz tomorrow, I really want to focus on slave culture. It's a very important topic that I don't want to shortchange. And I want to make sure that we give some of the African-American community, the slave community, its due by discussing slave culture and how important it was in shaping the South, even though slaves had no rights and were considered property at the time. So you know what's up tomorrow. We've got the reading quiz. We'll talk about some slave culture, and then we're going to spin this into kind of more of a political issue tomorrow. So I hope you guys have enjoyed and get a lot out of this tomorrow. Keep in mind that the reading from 2 nights ago or from Tuesday is also going to be accounted for on your fireside chat this week. So take care, everybody, and remember, the past shapes the future. Have a good night.